Hello and welcome to Newswire. I'm Ayza Omar. From local news reports and police sources, since 5th of August this year, since the BJP-led government stripped Kashmir of its special status, 16 people have been killed, including a young boy and a woman. 467 people are reportedly injured in the various firing and protest incidents, and 11,000 people have been detained. I'm talking about Indian-occupied Kashmir, which has been in a complete lockdown since 5th of August. Now, what we will also talk about today in our show is the situation there in the northeastern state of India, in Assam, and what the sentiment on the ground is after a list has been published by the National Registry of Citizens list that essentially has excluded 1.9 million Indians from it. Now, these individuals have been excluded because they haven't been able to prove their genuine citizenship. Now, what was the aim of this exercise and why was it necessary, especially at this time when India is getting a lot of attention from the world over the issue of what is happening in Kashmir? So we'll be discussing this and more with our guests. Without further ado, let me introduce who will be joining us today for this conversation. We have in our Islamabad studios Mr. Asif Ali Khan Durrani, a former ambassador. Thank you for taking out the time and speaking with us, Mr. Durrani. Also, we have from Delhi, Mr. Rajiv Desai, an analyst who will be telling us more about the situation in Assam. My first question to you, Mr. Durrani, if we're talking about the revocation of Article 370, it comes at a crucial time here where world politics have pretty much also been focusing on the Afghan Taliban talks that have been going on for almost a year now. The 9th round had just concluded. Do you see any kind of connection between these two events?
Well, it was timing was quite surprising as far as revocation of Article 370 was concerned, because prima facie there was no case of taking this drastic action, except that one can draw a linkage with the Afghan situation. The reason is that India has been deprived of the place at the high table, and probably that was the reason that India has been playing spoiler's role. So if you go into further depth of the issue, then you will see that India has been using Afghanistan for creating troubles in Pakistani Balochistan. They have also been in touch with the TTP. So therefore, it was quite a launching base for the Indians to be present in Afghanistan.
So how, in your opinion, it would have, what was BJP's plan? How would they have, by revoking Article 370, come in the way of Taliban talks?
No, the reason was that then it has created a new situation. The tensions between India and Pakistan have increased manifold. And now there is a complete lockdown in the occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Over 8 million Kashmiris are they are living in a concentration camp. They are cut off of the world. So definitely it has diverted Pakistan's attention. While Pakistan has been doing its bid as far as facilitating the talks between Taliban and US was concerned, it has at the same time diverted Pakistan's attention.
Now, Mr. Desai, as this conversation continues to go forward, we will also want to shed some light on what we're hearing about the NRC list, where 1.9 million people have been excluded. Help us understand a little what this exclusion means.
Well, the entire situation in Assam is not something that's happened today or yesterday. It's been going on for a long, long time, even when it was East Bengal and then East Pakistan and later Bangladesh. There has been a huge migration, for whatever reason, into the state of Assam, which is actually a tea, as you know, grows tea, and there's lots of jobs and things there. So, and an oil-rich state. So, hundreds of thousands of people have migrated there. All tended to be Bengali speaking. So from the original United Bengal, then the divided, Bengali part of Pakistan, East Pakistan, and then eventually Bangladesh. And that upset the ethnic balance, and because these are Assamese speaking people and these are Bengali speaking. So the initial clash was between ethnicities, Bengali speaking and Assamese speaking. In that whole thing, some young people in the 80s saw an opportunity to carve out a political space for themselves within the state and nationally. And that's precisely what they did. The Assam Students' Union and things like that. And we were off and running. It became a political issue. But and I think I can remember how the government of Rajiv Gandhi tried to resolve the issue. I knew some of the players there, and they managed to keep everything calm. And essentially, there was I don't mean to get very technical, but the government in '83, that was before Rajiv Gandhi, had passed something, the Illegal Detention of Migrants Act, which was essentially to protect minorities. And that was challenged by a BJP activist in the Supreme Court, which upheld the challenge and threw out the thing. And this man is now the BJP chief minister of Assam. And the ethnic...
And he's endorsing this now, the NRC, he's endorsing this, ironically.
The ethnic thing took a religious turn when the BJP got involved with Mr. Son. And that's how... after years and years and years of Congress rule in Assam, the BJP formed government. They did all kinds of things. And
as they've been going on, essentially the NRC picked up pretty much in 2014, as I understand it, even though this process, as you mentioned, is as old as 1971. But here's my question here. Now, for example, these 1.9 million people, they haven't been able to prove what the state government is saying is genuine citizenship. So they will now face tribunals. Is that what's going to happen? Foreign tribunals that are then going to judge whether or not they are genuine citizens?
Yes, that's what I believe the plan is. I think personally it's a huge mess because any government in India is at best at any government. BJP, Congress is at best incompetent, and for them to try and process these hundreds of thousands of people is going to create such a huge mess that a lot of people are worried.
You also talk about the practicality of it that I can completely understand. There are over 1 billion people in India here, and of course it's going to be made of all kinds of cultures, ethnic backgrounds, religions. But the critics that are commenting on this is not only is it worrisome because of its inefficiency and hence that it could be a bit faulty and unfair to some, but is that this may be the BJP-led government's way of, again, protecting not the minorities, but actually the Hindus.
No, this is everything that this government seems to do is intended to affirm and reaffirm its whole pro-Hindutva stance. So they keep doing, they did it in Kashmir, they're doing it now. It's all politically driven. It's not driven by any other reason at all. It's not like they wanted to solve a problem in Kashmir or in Assam. They think that that's how they positioned it. But the fact is, in Assam, you've ended up with a huge complication. And we don't know where it's going to go from here. Nobody knows, actually. And that's a lot of people. And, it's some of the people on the left in India, some of the people in opposition have tried to compare it to this. It's a bit exaggerated, of course, but tried to compare it to the stripping of the citizenship of the Jews by Hitler's Reich and so forth. So, on all sides, there are all these extreme statements. And, we actually haven't had a moment's peace as citizens of India since 2014. There's always something or the other. And, frankly, a lot of people are getting completely exhausted by this. Constant
it is, and it's also
and emotion.
And it's also, I mean, if you were looking at just the export patterns over the past 20, 30 years, India was doing significantly well until the 2014 government came in. And now we're seeing one of the worst economies periods unfold in India. But Mr. Desai, I want to come back to you and talk a little more about not just the ethnic divide taking place in Assam and how that is crossing borders and what it's doing here in Jammu and Kashmir. But coming back to you, Mr. Durrani, while we talk about whether this is a distraction method, but let's come back to Kulbhushan Yadav, an Indian spy that was captured here, detained, and then sentenced to life, to the death sentence. Later on, ICJ came forward and said that India needs to have consular access, which was provided today. Now, could this possibly be a window of opportunity into resolving what is right now becoming very fast-speeding tensions between India and Pakistan?
Well, it would be too early to say that because the Kulbhushan case is a criminal case. It's a spy job which he was performing, and then he was also involved in the killing of many people in Pakistan. So providing consular access means that his whatever demands are or whatever wishes are, those are to be conveyed to the Indian government. And therefore, the consular officers of the Indian High Commission, they have been provided this access.
Right, but Mr. Durrani, the idea that Pakistan continues to meet its obligations or its commitments or its promises, and this has been going on since Pulwama, early February this year, where the back foot almost by some critics that Pakistan's been too soft, it's coming across as weak. But what Prime Minister Imran Khan has continuously done is shown a hand of friendship here. Do you think that that this is being completely unheard in the current scenario of the sort of, and here I also refer to what is unfolding in Afghanistan?
In a way, yes, I tend to agree with your line of question because I think Prime Minister Imran Khan has displayed statesmanship with regard to India-Pakistan relations and also with regard to facilitating dialogue between Taliban and the United States. So, and that has been very much acknowledged at the international level, whether it was returning of Indian pilot after this Balakot incident, or facilitating a dialogue between Taliban and the US, and which has made quite a headway. And we have to hear a good news, I think, in some days, if not the matter of hours.
Okay. Stay with us, Mr. Durrani. Here, I'd like to also welcome Ms. Nayeema Mahjoor, a Kashmiri by birth, journalist and analyst, joining us right now from London. Thank you for taking out the time, Ms. Mahjoor. First of all, I want to ask you you have family there in Jammu and Kashmir. You yourself are from Srinagar. Tell us a little about what information you have. Since there is a communication blackout, have you been able to get in touch with your loved ones?
No, Ayza, for the last 4 weeks, I'm trying very hard. I mean, since 18th of August, I came to London, and since then, I've not been able to get in touch with my relatives. Actually, I got a call from one of the officials in Jammu and Kashmir, giving me a very bad news that one of our relatives who is suffering from a cancer, he was supposed to go to the doctor, but he couldn't get ambulance and he couldn't reach a hospital, and he was having some fever and in a very, a very vulnerable situation, but he couldn't get medical treatment. Then we had to send somebody from Delhi to go to Kashmir and get him to see the doctor. And that is how the situation is in Kashmir with everyone. I mean, I could get some contact with the official, but tell me about the ordinary people who doesn't have any communication, and this is a blockade going on for the last 4 weeks now. People are suffering miserably, very miserably, because they can't go out. They can't go to see the doctor. They can't go to hospitals. They are running out of the supplies, essential supplies, medical supplies. And this is situation what is after 4 weeks of communication blockade.
I'm very sorry to hear about your relative who is suffering from cancer and can't get medical attention, but this really portrays the kind of situation as you spelled out for us. And then these reports that come in that doctors are being arrested for speaking about and advocating for giving access to supplies, medical supplies, and to patients to hospitals. It's very concerning. We've heard and seen US Senator, who's also a presidential contender, Bernie Sanders, come out and outright reject what India is doing in Jammu and Kashmir. When you hear these kind of statements, does it give you any hope that this is finally getting the kind of attention that it needs to be resolved?
Yes, certainly, Ayza, because at least some of the people who are, opinion makers in the world these days, these senators, these parliamentarians, most of in US and UK, they have been speaking louder now against these atrocities, against these human rights violations. And this definitely gives us a hope, but I would love to see the governments of these countries raising voice against these atrocities, which we are not seeing yet. And we are trying the diaspora, this Kashmir diaspora around the world. They are doing a lot these days, and you can see the demonstrations, protests going on throughout the world this time. And we are trying our very hard to get governments of these countries involved so that this blockade is lifted, restrictions are lifted, and people have a normal day of life at least.
Okay, normal day of life. Ms. Mahjoor, stay with us there. Coming back, Mr. Desai. Now, Ms. Mahjoor, of course, you must be familiar with her work. She's worked with major news networks internationally, locally, and she's a Kashmiri herself. And now she's sitting in London. She's escaped from the kind of situation Srinagar had to offer. Her relatives are going through a lot. But she's not just one example. There are 8 million people. The kind of image this portrays of India, which, you know, the government, the people, and they should be proud to say this, that we are the biggest democracy of the world. But then on the flip side, this is going on for now a month. And then this kind of blackout, the kind of image it portrays, what is the sentiment like within India itself? Are they concerned whether the BJP is making the right choice here?
Well, there's no way to know. That's number one. Because all the steps in Kashmir and elsewhere are all taken with very, very deliberate media coverage and essentially propaganda. So it's very difficult to tell. That's number one. Number two, remember the Kashmir part of it is Article 370. That was a part of the BJP manifesto. Right. They said that we will remove it. Mm-hmm. And they've said we've done it. So what they're saying is we've delivered on our manifesto.
So, but then what was the BJP's election manifesto saying? Whether it was 2014 elections or these ones, 2019, about Assam, because now what's unfolding there, it again seems to be the kind of timing and the kind of image it portrays doesn't really go in the favor of BJP being the people's voice, so to speak.
Well, yeah, well, BJP, the people don't have a voice in a sense, but the fact is that during the 2019 campaign as well, lots of campaigners from the BJP had spoken out about removing foreigners from Assam. That is, by the way, shorthand for religious bigotry. You know, all they're concerned, and one of the things they said, within the right-wing Hindutva fold, there was an argument that, you know, we shouldn't just ban everybody, we should let Hindu refugees in and leave the others out, the Christians and the Muslims and so forth. So it's a complete, absolute mess. I hope they have a plan to deal with it, because in the meanwhile, something you started to talk about, the Indian economy is teetering. It's really very badly off. Just a few days ago, we heard that it was the lowest growth rate in years of 5% of GDP. Mm-hmm. Unemployment is at a 40-year high. You know.
So it could be argued in a way, Mr. Desai, that this kind of economy that the BJP has overseeing has been responsible for since 2014 and hasn't been delivered on. And these kind of, you know, newsmakers and sort of attention grabbers like the revocation of Article 370. And Ms. Mahjoor, let me get your comments on this as well. Whether the revocation of Article 370 at a time with a complete blackout, while the Indian government continues to say that everything is fine there and this is for the security of the people, could it be seen as a distraction from where BJP actually has failed?
And now, definitely, this is a perception now everywhere, not only in Kashmir, it is all over India as well, that they have got this downturn in economy and they are just diverting the attention of this economic failure, what they have been doing for the last 6-7 years. And that's why, if they have done this revocation of Article 370, what was the use of doing this communication blockade of 8 million people, keeping them inside the homes? If they are happy to just get away with this Article 370, why don't they let loose people? Why don't they allow people to come on the road? Why don't they allow children to go to school, offices to run?
Because they know that the people will come out and protest.
Yeah. So, then they know it. But if it is that's what everybody thinks, that it's a territorial war. They just want to get a land of the Kashmir, not the Kashmiris. They are not. I mean, it's a sort of a vendetta against Kashmiris, the whole population of Kashmir, who have some sort of aspiration which they are fighting for. And now they've been locked down and they've been kept, inside a big prison of Kashmir. That's how it's, people in India as well, most of the people who are emancipated and who know the value of secularism, they think this thing has happened and they just are trying to divert the attention of the people now and just not talking about economy, not talking about, and look at Assam.
Okay, Ms. Mahjoor, unfortunately, I have to interrupt you there. We're out of time for this part of the discussion. Thank you so much, Mr. Desai, for speaking with us, and Ms. Mahjoor. Stay with us, Mr. Durrani. We will be coming back after the break to talk about how the 9th round of US-Taliban talks have concluded and the consequent violence in Afghanistan. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Newswire. Now we'll be talking about what's unfolding here in Afghanistan. So the 9th round of peace talks between the Taliban and the US have pretty much concluded in Doha, Qatar. Just weeks away are Afghanistan's presidential elections. Now, peace talks have been going on for a year with not much of a major breakthrough as we would expect. Now, the Taliban refused to, of course, negotiate with the Afghan government. That's a big impediment in the way of any conclusive agreement coming out. Now, I'd like to read out a tweet that Mr. Zalmay Khalilzad, the U.S. Special Envoy to Afghanistan, had said concluding after these talks, which says, "We are at the threshold of an agreement that will reduce violence and open the door for Afghans to sit together to negotiate an honorable, sustainable peace and a unified sovereign Afghanistan that does not threaten the United States, its allies, or any other country." Now, I should mention here that while this tweet came out, we also saw an escalation of violence within Afghanistan. Even though Washington was saying that they're at the verge of an agreement, they were ongoing. And at the moment, at the time of this recording, there is an ongoing battle in Baghlan province of Afghanistan between Afghan forces and the Taliban. Now, the Afghan security forces have said that 4 civilians, 2 members of the security forces, and 21 Taliban fighters have so far been killed in this recent escalation. This is, by the way, the second such attack by the Taliban in just the past 2 days to take place in Afghanistan. So how are these attacks affecting the peace talks as they take place almost at the same time? And how close are the talks to a peaceful Afghanistan, leave alone a kind of an agreement even? So to discuss this and more, we've got our guests with us. Let me introduce from earlier, Mr. Asif Ali Khan Durrani, the former ambassador. You're still with us from the Islamabad studios. Thank you for staying on. And also we have from Washington, D.C., Mr. Bharath Gopalaswany, an analyst and distinguished fellow with the Observer Research Foundation. And we have Mr. Graeme Smith, a consultant with the International Crisis Group. Thank you so much for taking out the time and speaking with us here. I want to start with you, Mr. Durrani. If we are to look at how the peace talks are, the 9th round has come to a close with pretty much nothing distinguishable, or I might be very wrong. In your opinion, do you think something can be drawn from how these peace talks went?
Well, Ayza, I think the vibes coming from Mr. Zalmay Khalilzad and Taliban spokesperson does not convey any negative message so far. Yes, there are speculations regarding the number of American troops to stay or American insistence of leaving their troops behind, of course, with the reduced number. And at the same time, cessation of hostilities. But in your intro, you have already mentioned the escalation in Baghlan and earlier in Kunduz. So I think Taliban would continue to keep up their pressure, and in order to continue with their onslaught and consolidate their position in the country on the ground. And at the same time, I think the demand that they should hold intra-Afghan dialogue, there should be an intra-Afghan dialogue between the Taliban and the present dispensation. It all depends how the talks between Taliban and Americans culminate. So far, I think the reaction has been positive from both sides. Let's hope, because we should expect these kind of glitches, and as in the diplomatic jargon, they say that nothing is agreed unless everything is agreed.
Right.
So everyone is keeping their fingers crossed regarding the culmination of the whole process. Yes,
okay.
Isaac.
So thank you, Mr. Durrani. Stay with us there. Mr. Gholamzadeh, getting to you now. I'd like to hear your point of view on this, whether it is, as Mr. Durrani mentioned, it's all part of the game, all part of the process. Collateral damage is always going to happen. Or is there a timeline? Who's running out of time here? Who's got time as a leverage, in your opinion?
I think my colleague in your studio has got, I kind of agree with him and I echo his views in the sense that the people who are running out of the time are actually the United States, because we are already in an election mode. The Democratic presidential campaign has started, has gained a little bit of momentum, and within a few months you'll see the election campaign getting into a new frequency, so to speak. And I'm sure Trump would like to see a deal before he gets on the election trail, where he's able to write a victory speech and script a victory speech. And I'm sure many other international actors, as well as some of the Taliban actors, know this time frame very well. So essentially, the United States, Zalmay Khalilzad is under pressure to deliver a big result and a big victory for Trump. And that's where that's I think that's the single most trump card, so to speak, is what is holding all these negotiations. And like my colleague says that the Taliban are talking at one level and are also continuing the fighting, so that puts the pressure on the Americans. So every time you see a tweet that we're on the threshold of a deal, we're all wondering what the deal is, when the deal is, and what the contours of such a deal is. And more importantly for me, what the sustainability of such a deal looks like. So I think that's what these are the questions that I would be asking. And I'm sure Zalmay Khalilzad is wondering and pondering and negotiating along these lines.
That's a really good point here, because we seem to never hear about the contours of the deal, as you said. Here, Mr. Smith, I'd also like to get your take on it. While we're talking about timelines, we've also got the Afghan presidential elections lined up for the end of September. And while that seems to be on track pretty much roughly about so for the 28th of September, there is a concern amongst critics and analysts that this entire process of the peace deal could be overshadowing essentially the importance and the sort of the efficacy of these presidential elections in terms of affecting even the voter turnout.
I think that's certainly the point of view of the opposition candidates who are put their names in the hat to be the next president of Afghanistan. Many of the campaigns have kind of slowed down, if not halted, because they don't see the point in risking their lives holding campaign rallies across the country in Afghanistan if really the main political show is going to be the peace talks. President Ghani disagrees, and he would like to go ahead with the elections because in part, I think it's very likely that he would be reelected if elections go ahead as planned on the 20th of September. And I'm told that preparations are well underway. More than 80,000 security forces have been mobilized. Things are technically well in hand. So it's quite possible that President Ghani will barrel ahead despite whatever is happening in the negotiations. And, right now it seems that these things could happen at exactly the same time, potentially.
But there's a big concern here also, Mr. Smith, that the Taliban's come out and said and discouraged the Afghans that do not participate in these elections. They're advocating for them to be boycotted. Could that also obviously raise concerns about the kind of violence we're seeing in Kunduz and Baghlan?
Yeah, we're likely to see extremely low turnout if the vote goes ahead. Keep in mind that last time, when there was a parliamentary round last year, only 3.6 million votes were declared to have been recorded. And, the declared number is never the real number because of the high levels of fraud. And 3.6 million is an incredibly small number in a country of about 38 million people. You're talking about some of the lowest voter turnout on the planet for any parliamentary vote. So, it won't be a ringing endorsement of the democracy that the Americans have tried to create in Afghanistan.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, that will underline the need for a political process with the Taliban so that, all Afghans can be included in the system.
Now, that is one of the continuing arguments, Mr. Durrani, that the Taliban do not want to negotiate, do not want to recognize the current Afghan government. And with the current political scenario, as Mr. Smith is also predicting, it seems like President Ghani is pretty much primed for the next win also. And if that becomes the case, would you see the peace talks coming to a halt? Do you think they will be affected at all? How do you see this moving forward in that situation?
I think we need to understand the whole format of this dialogue which is going on. When Taliban insists that direct talks with the Americans, they think that the Ashraf Ghani government is an extension of the American presence in Afghanistan. They, in fact, use the harsh words of puppet government. So we have to understand the Taliban psyche in this regard. And I don't see elections taking place on 28th September. Reason being that the Americans and the European Union, which have to, in fact, fund these election expenditures, they have not come forward so far for holding of these elections. Even the Americans have not committed themselves to these elections. So this whole process seems doubtful, and the importance is given to the success of the dialogue between Taliban and the Americans. So therefore, what has so far transpired, as Mr. Gopalaswany said, that we don't know the details. Right. Whatever details have trickled down through American and Taliban sources, that reveals that so far now there is a talk of American troops to the extent of 8,000 will stay back for a period of 18 months to 2 years. But there's no final word about that. But since it has come out, so we can take it on its face value.
There is definitely a lot of speculation going on around a discussion that is taking place in Doha between the US and the Taliban here. Mr. Gopalaswamy, if I could come to you here. And one of the speculations will also include the talk of the Taliban wanting an interim setup. Do you think that is, and this is something obviously Mrs. Khalilzad has even come out and said that no such talk has taken place. We're not talking about this. But considering the sensitivity of the situation, the kind of time that is left on the hands of the US, what with their presidential elections underway, do you think that this could be a possibility of what is unfolding in the back channel talks, so to speak?
Well, I think, there are all sorts of, knowing Ambassador Khalilzad, I think there are all sorts of possibilities, all sorts of options, and there's no single right answer or a right solution or the right key to the locks that are available out there. So, I wouldn't discount any option, so to speak, if there is an option, and I'm sure all options will be explored. Okay. But one of the major things for me here is to look, for 19 years, this is one of the longest and the bloodiest wars in American history. And what we have fought, essentially, spilt American blood and treasure, is a democratic process and a government that we've set up in Afghanistan. That has been one of the major wins, so to speak, in the last 19 years. If there were any clear, there are a number of positives from this that have come out. It's a role of women. It's what the role of Afghan women today are and what they were under the Taliban. What is a democratic form of government and an election and everything. These are key principles and values that America has spilled blood and treasure on. And that's what we've instituted. Now, whether Taliban being part of the government is a fabric of the society, whatever you may want to call it, however you may want to constitute it. But these are the goals that we've strived and fought for in Afghanistan. And now, how do you value this? How do you keep this going forward, as well as put an end to this war and get out of a situation that's sustainable and walk out from Afghanistan on American terms and not on Taliban's terms? I think those are things that would, if you notice, those are the op-eds that's being and the editorials that are being written in the New York Times. That is the kind of debate that we are looking at.
Right. But Mr. Smith, then let me to this conversation. I would have asked this to Mr. Gopalaswany because it is his point of view here. But what's your take on it, considering what he's saying is that American values, democratic values, is everything that the US stands for. And of course, peace and hegemony. And they want to leave Afghanistan on their terms also, with a kind of a setup that will ensure that all countries, including themselves and their allies, are safe, etc., etc. But yet at the same time, we're talking about them dealing with the Taliban here, where they might have, by some statistics, more land under their control. But at the same time, they don't have what one would say is the popular vote here. I mean, especially the women who are mostly concerned of all the progress they've made in these past, albeit bloody years, 19 years. But that could pretty much go down, could go to nothing. It would be worth nothing then.
Yeah, progress for Afghan women might depend on the woman you ask. I mean, more than 80% of Afghanistan is rural, and you've got a huge number of mothers and grandmothers of the Taliban in rural Afghanistan who have been sacrificing their sons and their brothers to fight the foreigners. And so for them, progress would be seeing the foreigners leave. And that, I think that you're going to see celebration, in the rural villages of the South and the East, probably, within a week or so, if and when this deal between the United States and the Taliban is announced. Mm-hmm. And I would just say that, if the United States want to set the terms for politics in Afghanistan, it would have to win the war. And it has not won the war. And so now when you talk about the kind of values that are going to shape the future politics of Afghanistan, we might have to talk more about Afghan values. And, that's hopefully what we will see emerge as intra-Afghan negotiations get underway, which is powerful Afghan players sitting down in a room and trying to shape the political future of their country together.
Right. And that's an interesting point you raised there, because when you speak of Afghan values, and if I can get your comment on this, Mr. Gopalaswany, when we speak of Afghan values and the way they do business, how they resolve conflict and issues is including all parties concerned. And that's where the bone of contention is. Do you see any kind of maneuvering unfolding, especially with this presidential elections coming up, where the Taliban and the Ghani government can finally sit together and at least have some attempt to an intra-Afghan dialogue?
I think that's correct. I think that is probably what is holding up all these negotiations, is where the Afghan values lie. Kabul is not Kabul today, what it was in 1995, 1996, the Taliban period. Nor Kabul is New York or Washington, D.C. So Kabul is somewhere in between. And what is it that we reconcile with, and how do we walk away with it, is in my speculation, is what the content and the majority of the intra-Afghan negotiations are today. And I think we're working very hard to say, how do you recognize the Taliban government? How do you recognize the Afghan government? How does the Taliban recognize, and what is the public recognition of such a government? And when you reach that sweet spot is where I think somewhere the answer for us lies, is what are the values and what are the kind of political processes and principles that all of us are willing to live with. At the same time, ensuring that the fight is put to an end, the war is put to an end, and we all walk away, so that this is a more stable society than it is.
All right. Okay, Mr. Gopalaswamy there. Thank you so much. And Mr. Smith and Mr. Durrani. Sorry, we've run out of time here, so we're going to take a quick short break. And when we're back, we will be apprising you of the latest from Lebanon and Israel. Welcome back. I'm Ayza Omar and you're watching Newswire. Now, the Lebanese Prime Minister, he's asked the US and France to intervene as tensions have escalated between Lebanon and Israel, especially since last week. Between them has been a lot of cross-border fire that has been exchanged. Now, tensions, of course, escalated after Hezbollah reciprocated to last week's Israeli attack on its media office in Beirut. Now, on Sunday, Israel responded by firing into southern Lebanon. Now, as these tensions continue, this has been happening on Sunday and also today, more skirmishes took place across the border. We would speak with now our analyst, our friend, Mr. Hamid Gholamzadeh, who once joins us here on Newswire from Tehran. Welcome to the show. Mr. Gholamzadeh, the general mood in the Middle East is very tense now. What with the US-Iran tensions and then last week, Israel attacking 3 different countries and making things worse, not to forget to mention that they're also facing an election coming up in a few days. How does this latest skirmish between Lebanon and Israel worsen things for Iran?
Actually, what happened last week and just a few days ago showed that how the balance of power is working in the Middle East. The Israelis attacked, as you mentioned, 3 countries, and they also sent the drones to Lebanon. And then as soon as Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of the Hezbollah, said that they are going to retaliate, everything changed in the occupied Palestine and among the Israelis. You could easily see the stress and fear in their reactions, and that shows how everything is working in the Middle East in reality, actually, on the ground. And as you mentioned, we should consider actually the election as well. What is happening right now is that the Prime Minister Netanyahu is trying to seize the opportunity to actually use it in his own favor for the upcoming elections. On the other side, it seems that the Hezbollah and the Lebanese people are actually eager to have the situation going on so that they can impact the elections to remove Netanyahu.
Well,
in terms of
sorry, I just want to interrupt here quickly since you mentioned this. We've spoken to various analysts operating, studying Israel, and they've all said the same thing across the board, is that whether it's Netanyahu or Benny Gantz or anybody else, they're all on the same page when it comes to Israel's security policy, and that they are behind Netanyahu on this move that he has made. So the question, they say, is not whether he's doing this for political maneuvering. So then it remains to be seen what is the whole purpose of it. Is then the other camp which says, the analysts say that, well, President Trump is the one who's backing out for taking on Iran full on because he is intimidated or concerned about Iran's allies in the region.
Actually, the bigger image is about Iran. Yes. What happened in different countries that Israel attacked last week was that they claimed that they are attacking Iranian assets or Iranian allies in Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq. And yes, the bigger image is about Iran. And there are several messages that Israelis are trying to transfer. First of all, they want to show that they have the power to attack Iran, and Iran does not respond to that. They want to show the Americans that you could not retaliate what happened to you regarding the drone and other things, and we can do that. They want to show that Iran is a country that they can attack without any consequences. But the point is that what apparently Americans and Europeans know is that Iran is not eager to respond to what is happening by the Israelis. It's not going to be provoked, actually, by the moves that the Israelis are doing. So it would be just some try by Netanyahu to actually escalate from a proxy war into a direct war with Iran, which doesn't seem to be happening.
But then when you talk about strong allies, and of course, Lebanon, I mean, when Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah came out last week and announced that we will take revenge on this, on Israel's attack, the drone strike that destroyed the media office in Beirut. I mean, and then they go ahead and make this move. Like, this is a huge gamble that neither party can afford at this point, nor Israel nor Lebanon. And also, this is the first strike from Lebanon on Israel since 2006. So one would then wonder whether Iran could play a bigger role in de-escalating these tensions at this point.
Actually, tension with Israel doesn't need Iran. Iran is much a bigger, actually, player than Israel. So to conquer over Israel, Hezbollah alone is sufficient, and it doesn't actually need even the whole Lebanese army. Just as you mentioned, 2006, we remember what happened. It was Hezbollah who actually overcame the Israelis and proved that the size of the army, the military equipment, such things are not enough, and the bravery and the courage to use them and the tactics to use them is the more important factor in a war. And Hezbollah has proved for several cases that it has actually the upper hand in practice on the ground. Yes, in words you can say a lot of things, just like President Trump saying a lot of claims, and other people, Prime Minister Netanyahu can also make a lot of claims. But it doesn't mean that they can actually fulfill that. But on the other side, we know that that's the reason why the Israelis are frightened.
Mr. Gholamzadeh, thank you so much for your take on the current escalations between Israel and Lebanon. We've unfortunately run out of time. We will be seeing you tomorrow with a brand new episode of Newswire. Till then, goodbye.